They saw me walking 3 meters across from the seat at the table. I then climbed over the glass rail that overlooked the Opera House on the right and the Sydney Harbour Bridge on the left, stood on the other edge, and then I jumped. It's so amazing how quickly, to share that story now, how quickly things got that bad. So that was November 2003. If I go back 7 months, so 7 months, I was living the dream in England, engaged to be married to Zoe, gorgeous backpacker I met in southern Thailand 4 years earlier. I just done 4 years living and working in the UK, running a really successful car import business. Yeah, I had money in my pocket. I bought a nice house just outside of London. I bought a house back in Adelaide. Things were excellent. And it was this silly little photograph that I got emailed through from my best mate, Corey White. For those, David's Adelaidean. For those who've been to Adelaide, Glenelg's just the best. It's a great seaside town. My best mate bought a house there. He paid $124,000 for it in 2001. He sent a photograph of all of my 10 best mates having beers, sausages, and the barbie, and I was there, buddy, in freezing, absolutely freezing cold, wet shit England. It was dark at 3:15, and I was just so obsessed with my work, and I loved it, that I worked every day. I worked 6 days a week, and that photograph just hit me, and I printed the picture off, took it home to Zoe, and I never forget it. I just went home with a big smile on my face, and I just said, that's it. Let's quit. Like, we've saved up enough. British pound was worth really good money back then. It was almost $3 to one. Like, we were set, So we had a 2 or 3 hour dinner that night, and we decided the next morning to both resign. And that was the start. I never would have thought that was the start of what started my downward spiral. So we resigned. We spent 6 weeks going around New Zealand, landed back into Adelaide in March. And so March 2003, it was really exciting to be back home. I love playing golf. I love surfing. I just wanted to see my mates. And it was really good for the first probably 10 days. But then all of a sudden, as a young 28-year-old male, the job title, how much money I earn, all that stuff that actually makes your ego, makes you who you are, all of a sudden I felt a huge pressure upon myself to actually live up to the expectations, I think, of myself. It wasn't my mates pressuring me. It was just me wanting to get the same commercial level job I got in London. Now, that was never going to happen. I'd done a very unique job, and I started applying for job after job. I get some really good jobs, but they weren't up to the job title that I thought was the right one, and it wasn't the right money. If I was after $80,000 a year back in 2001, I'd get a job for $50,000 and a sales rep car. And it wasn't so much about the money; it was more about the prestige of where I was role-wise. You can say that as a 47-year-old, because you don't really. I think I've got to an age where I don't really care what social status that I've got to. It's just about being happy and seeing your mates, and that went on for about probably 2 months. I explain it like a fuel tank. So when you fill up your car, and the chemicals that make you feel really good, the serotonin and the feel-good chemicals, are topped up. But then after 2 or 3 months applying for job after job after job, I just kept declining the jobs. I'd saved up a lot of money, and I didn't need to work, but I did to not burn through my savings, but to get some confidence back. Yet I was looking for that job that just didn't come. And so for 3 months, that was okay. But I reckon after about 4 months, I started to feel it. Number one, I started to withdraw socially. Any night out with all of our mates, and you know, I was desperate to go to that stuff when I was living in England. Yet I just come back to Adelaide, and I didn't want to go out. If I went out, I'd just see all my other mates or my peers who, you know, were estate managers or had bought their second house, and you know, they'd progressed. Some of them had kids, and I really felt out of my social network. The second thing I think that really started to happen was I just couldn't. My decision-making process really started to struggle. I think looking back, I was in early signs of showing really bad anxiety and leading into panic attacks. And I was in that fight or flight where you're very reactive and you don't plan things. If anyone knows Adelaide, like we have, I don't know, 120, 150 petrol stations in the CBD and, you know, metro. I ran out of petrol 4 times in the 6 weeks leading up to my attempt, and like you just don't run out of petrol. It doesn't matter about the petrol stations. You look at your car, and if your car's quarter full, well, then you work out that you've got to go and fill up with petrol, and so you get yourself ready early and you go by the petrol station. When you're fight or flight and you're in a very anxious, depressed state, you don't think about those things. You're always last minute doing things. And so I think the last time I ran out of petrol, I know I did, I left my wallet and my phone at home. So I needed some help to actually get the car full of petrol. I started avoiding, probably June, July, I started avoiding socialising. And one of the main pubs that we went to was the Havelock Hotel on Hart Street, and you know, not even socialising. Like that would be where most of our friends would go. Now, I just never went, and they talk about you being reclusive. I don't think I was ever reclusive. I just didn't go out in those fun environments.
Anthony, can I just ask a quick question on that? The question I had there was that you've moved back and you've had this very successful career in the UK. Things were going great. You've moved back here. Did you feel disconnected in some way? Was it coming back to Australia? Was it the belonging with your group, or did you feel that you were missing something, or were you just putting extra pressure on yourself?
Look, I know that I thought when I was in England, I thought I really missed that stuff. But when I actually, you know, it's when you go back to your old home, you've got the dose for, I don't know, 6 hours or a couple of days, and then you just I wanted the excitement again, and I had that almost after about 4 or 5 weeks. I was starting to apply for jobs back in London. Right, and so I had a real draw to go back to the UK. Now, if I did go back to the UK, I would have avoided dropping into a deep depression. I think it would have come out later in life with some other trigger, but connecting was a real struggle. If I fast forward to October, a month before I got really unwell, I got really bad. I couldn't sleep. And I think, as we all know in this mental health space, the majority of us blokes, or anyone who goes through a mental health challenge, 75% of people struggle to get good sleep, and I couldn't sleep. For 3 nights, I had 0 sleep. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Friday night, we went to my parents' house for tea, and I never forget it. I walked to the front door with Zoe. Dad was at the front of the house on the right-hand side. Mum was on the left. I was a complete mummy's boy growing up. Mum did everything for me. And she was very sociable and life and soul of the party. And so was I. Now, the second that I turned up there, she could see in my eyes that I was really focused. Pupils were dilated. I didn't look happy. I said hello to Dad. And as we walked through the house, Mum grabbed me by the arm and took me into the left side into the room and said to me, Anthony, tell me honestly how you're feeling. And I threw a one-liner off. Then she could see straight through it and said to me, look, that's bullshit. You know, you're not well. And with that, I started crying. I quickly wiped the tears away, went back down to the back of the house with my gorgeous fiance and Dad, and they didn't pick it. But Mum said to me that night, go to the GP the next day and be brutally honest with the doctor. And that's what I did. I went to the GP the next morning. Before I went in, I wrote on an A5 notepad the 6 or 7 things that I would tell the doctor. Went into the GP. I was only in there for about 8 minutes. I told her the pieces that I thought she'd accept to be able to give me an antidepressant script. And so after 8 minutes, I saw her pick up the pen and write out a script. And I remember punching the air under the desk thinking, that's it, I'm fixed. She was the wrong GP for me. She was a good-looking female, only a few years older than me, known me since I was quite young. So I wasn't going to go in there and just break down and get upset with her. So, but how do you stop that? How do you stop that consult, and how do you get a GP that you can be honest with? You know, I left the GP, started taking medication, and then I got a great job. And that job was with a bank that said, we can see that the skill you've had in your job, go to Sydney, do a 9-week course, and then after that, you can come back and do the job back in Adelaide. I was far too ill then to go, and I remember at the airport in departure lounge in Adelaide, sitting there, I was crying in my hand. I was upset. And Zoe, my fiance, now wife, kind of, you know, I don't mean it, but snap out of it. Come on, you've got a great job. I took that flight, and that's where I landed into Sydney. So I did 9 days in the course, and I was simply not. I was not up to sitting in a new career path with academic stuff to learn. And so very early on in that course, I started to fall asleep. I wouldn't respond to questions. And then on the Friday in the second week, the trainer came. I don't know what they said. They just asked me to leave, and they said, let's have a chat outside. Go home, go and have a bit of a freshen up in your hotel, and we'll meet you at the dinner tonight at the Rocks. And so I vaguely remember that path. I got the ferry from North Sydney into Circular Quay, and that's how I became up on the top of that roof. I obviously survived. 7 stories down, there was a jutted out balcony with a canvas awning pulled over. It was pulled over a spa area and a barbecue area. And that awning was luckily pulled out. I smashed into that at 190 k's an hour, and that took all the impact through my body, which I then broke through that awning. Somehow I got thrown out into the sky to the next level down, and then I landed on the concrete on another balcony below it. I don't have any recollection of any of that. That's from what people have told me, but all I do remember is waking up 3 weeks later out of a coma, and people just telling me. I don't recall it, but I think the first thing that happened straight away is that certainly my recovery was fast tracked because I didn't have to tell anyone any bullshit story as to what happened to me. You know, within probably 2 or 3 hours, you know, it's amazing how wide your network is in Adelaide. Adelaide's a small place, everyone knows everyone, and you know, within 2 or 3 hours, everyone knew that what had happened. So I think during my recovery, that was the biggest thing that actually made my recovery a lot faster, because I didn't have to get past hiding a lot of that stuff. So if I saw, John, if you came in and saw me at the rehab clinic, it was awkward for the first second or so, 2 seconds, but then after that, like, you would crack a joke at me or something, or say something stupid to me, and then that's it. End of story. And I think the first thing I learned in recovery is that I didn't lose any friends. One of my best friends couldn't work it out. His mum died of cancer only a year prior to my attempt, and he got really pissed off with me, thinking that I chose just to give up, where his mum had to fight to try and save her life. So it wasn't till 8 years after that he heard me do a talk that I don't recall any of that last 6 hours. And I think I reckon I've probably spoken to 150 people who have tried to take their life. And I still hear, I reckon from what they've told me, 75%, maybe 70% had a thought and a plan. I reckon the other 30% that I've spoken to, like me, didn't actually consciously ever want to go through with it. You know, for me, it was sleep deprivation, and it was severe anxiety, plus a terrible medication. So the medication that I was given just wasn't the right one for me. Now, that isn't the fault of the GP. I went to the GP, guys, with it, like, I was determined, like, I'm a good salesperson. I was determined that I was going to get a medication and not be diverted to a psychiatrist and a psychologist. And I think probably one of the last things I'll share before I maybe open up for questions is I spent 6 months in rehab, and I couldn't walk, I couldn't talk, my brain was very badly damaged. But one thing that started to happen week after week after week was that I'd get mates that would come in. So, you know, I know David from Adelaide, or say Simon, you came down and saw me at the rehab clinic. It happened like clockwork. You'd turn up, you'd be blown away as to what happened to me, and then you'd start to get a bit emotional in your face, and you'd say, can we go down and have a coffee? And so I'd get put in the wheelchair, wheeled down to the coffee shop, and then that person would then open up to me, and they'd grab my wrist and say, don't you swear you won't tell anyone this, but this is what I've been going through the last 2 years. And I just couldn't believe it. These were people who were successful state managers, or they're gorgeous wife and 3 kids, and like from the outside, perfect. And as we know, that doesn't insulate you from a mind health condition. So those people would start to open up to me, and then I would simply start to share some of the things I had to do every day, which was, you know, number 1, talking. Number 2 was exercise. So I got wheeled out I found a swimming pool at the rehab clinic, and I just got them to wheel me out there every day and swim. And that's all I did. I talked, I swam. I had the choice to drink alcohol, but I just chose to go zero. So drugs and alcohol, rested. And then the 4th thing is I got some really good help. I mean, you're getting everything on the taxpayer. I was a government-funded accident, meaning I didn't have private health insurance, and so every bit of help I could get, I took. I had about 5 experts around me, and I got a sleep coach and a sleep person who came to me every week, and they came and just plotted my graphs and worked with all the other doctors to try and get my sleep worked out. So they were the main kind of 4 things that I would get my mates to go and do. And yeah, that's kind of been a passion my whole life. I put those 4 things into a little tracker book, and it's called Life Back Tracker. So Life Back Tracker is 4 steps to better mind health. And 5 years ago, I did a crowdfunding to get 50,000 to build that into an app. So that's a free app that literally all it will do is track exercise minutes, standard drinks of alcohol, sleep, and the talking. It's like the K10. So it just gets you to ask 10 questions to yourself, and it will basically show you how your kind of general happiness is compared to your 3 inputs of, sleep, exercise, and the alcohol. I might open up some questions now.
Who's got a question for Anthony?
Is there one thing that you wish you had done differently in those weeks leading up to that?
The one thing that I didn't do was actually ask for help, so I didn't try, I found it, and I still think this is a problem today. I found it so enormous, an enormous obstacle to get over. So I was living over in Sydney by myself. Practically, I would have had to pick up the phone. What would I have done? I would have had to ring my mum and said, "Come and get me," or do I ring my fiance and say, "I've just landed a job. I'm not well. You need to bring me back to Adelaide. I need to go and live in a mental," we know the branding perception of living in a mental facility. It's just bloody terrible, but I should have tried.
I'm interested if you could just speak to, obviously, we can do lots of proactive stuff to get people to try and identify when they're struggling. I'm interested about what your reflections are when people go beyond that and they're now in that hole and don't know how to get out, or don't even know that they're in the hole, where that led you to, obviously, without even realizing it, to walk off that building.
Yeah. So what the question was, how do I deal with people that I come across who are in that state, Kevin? Or
well, yeah, or just generally, what's your thoughts around? Because that's obviously the tricky thing, is because once people are into that space where they're not able to rationally perceive what's going on, or even recognise they're actually in a danger area, what some of the things that you've been processing, either in your conversations with other people, or just generally,
okay.
your own experience.
Yep. I mean, we did 5 major road shows with the PHN, and we went to Port Augusta, Port Pirie, Whyalla, Port Lincoln, and every night we did a different town, and it was aimed at suicide. We got, in hindsight, I think we got too many people who were very unwell, who turned up, right? And I think that there's a danger in doing that, because we didn't have all the services there on the night. But the first thing that I do when I catch up with anybody, like, you've got to try and take stuff out of your backpack. Like, a good mentor of mine, when your head's so cluttered, when you're in fight or flight or depressed and you're so bad, even in basic business, I write down all of my jobs, and I write down all the essential, and I write down they're either essential or desirable, right? Now, it's amazing how many things you can cut out of your life when you actually meet with someone who's in a really, really shit spot. It's a pretty basic exercise to try and get them to cut out. 75% doesn't have to happen. Right, you can ask for sick leave. You can find how many days you got sick leave off. You can, who's the first person you could share this really bad stuff with? right, go and tell that one person. Just get it down to 2 or 3 things that is like absolutely vital, like life or death. Now I'm not pushing my product because it's a free product. The Life Back Tracker is the biggest loss-making thing I've ever produced in my whole life. But all the app does is I get them. Subtly I have a chat with them. I try and find out of exercise. Exercise is chemically, without any shit changing in your life, if you go and do methodical, okay, I'm very aligned to water-based swimming. It just makes you feel so good. If you can go and do 3 weeks worth of cardio exercise every 4 or 5 times a week, right? Now, if you can do that in water, you get an extra boost. But you do that for 3 weeks, and every second day, every day go. I buddied up with lots of people who have been very bad in a bad spot, and now it doesn't take much for me to meet them at the pool. So I'll say, right, come on, let's go swimming tomorrow, and get them out and go and do some exercise. I think if someone's in such a shit spot, as we know, you can't ration. You can't ration with them. You can't get into a psychologist to do all the therapy. They've got to be taken from that really bad spot. So I, number one, try and empty their backpack by at least half. You can do that easily, and then straight away, just urge them to try and do some exercise. Exercise is bloody fantastic, and you know, we know problem shared's a problem halved. They've got to share. They've just got to download it with someone.
I'm interested around through your recovery. So you've hit this moment where you've thought of ideas like Life Back Tracker or Save Our Mates, and so when you've got those kinds of ideas, what are some of the, I guess you've assessed that there's some good you want to do. What are some of the things that you clued into? Like, how did you act on that good? Like, were you putting up barriers, and how did you break through barriers and commit to doing something good? Or what were some of the things you did to get the ball rolling so that, you know, eventually you came out with Save Our Mates and Life Back Tracker and so on?
Yeah, well, I never ever would have started it. I joined a business group. My family business was a pet stock, a pet retail business. Those who've got pets might see we're a big blue box building. We had 95 staff in Adelaide, and we had 8 stores. And if we had a sales meeting, a catalogue meeting, we get all the managers together, and I was the wheeler and dealer and the promotions and sales guy, and I got all the stock in from the suppliers. When I got the managers together, I'd go bright red. I'd rush my presentation I own the business with my dad and brother, so I own the business, and here I am with my employees getting nervous. I couldn't do a talk. I couldn't talk in front of people. So I joined a business group called an Entrepreneurs Organisation, and I had an accountability coach over the 12 months, and I had to pick out 3 fears that I had, and I had to try and overcome them. And so Gavin Schuster, actually, he's a 5th generation German farmer in Freeling, just north of Adelaide. He had 3 suicides in his town in the 3 months leading up to the first talk we did. And the last one was his long-term worker who didn't turn up to work for 10 days, and like he never missed a day in 25 years, and he was gone for 12 days. Gavin found him in a hay shed. And at the meeting, Gavin got so upset at the meeting. This big German farmer, Gavin, like proud and very successful, he just sobbed, and he said to me, "Come up to Freeling and do a talk." And I just froze. So asking about what gets the ball rolling, I just tripped into this. Like, I never ever want to go and do this stuff. I had a really successful family business. I had just had my first 2 kids. And then Gavin dragged me up to do a talk. So all I would say to you is, whatever your passion is, try and narrow it down to the most. If you only had a year to live, Matt, and you could spend 180 days doing what you love in what you're doing, go and do it. And you'll muck it up, right? But the more times you try it, the more authentic you'll get. So I don't know what you like doing. I mean, I went to the first talk. It went for 50 minutes from 6 till 7 o'clock. We had 135 farmers turn up. So Gavin, he made everyone come up. He made all the farmers turn up.
Mm-hmm.
It was not negotiable. And the population of Freeling was 510 people, and he got 135 men there. Right. So there were heaps of kids up there and wives. Now, we stayed there till 1:15 that night, and about 6 farmers in front of their peers shared their story. Just after mine, they're like, "Oh, Anthony, I've had depression for 15 years."
This is the sort of name for your talk, isn't it? Where you invite men to come and chew the fat and discuss with each other. Tell us a little bit about the way that you do that.
Yeah, sure. Well, the first one we did was July 7, 2015, and that was at Freeling. And it was called a Chew the Fat Night. Save our mates, chew the fat night. We just came up with it, and that led on to me doing probably 4 years of public speaking, and then doing the Life Backtracker app. And then everyone pivots back to where they start. I think you go back to your lane, and COVID hit. Events just went. No one was doing events. And so Gavin and I got together and thought, okay, we just need to make it real easy. Call it Chew the Fat. Men's night out, grab a beer, chew some pig, and have some beers, catch up with mates. And we decided to make sure that we couldn't get locked down or shut down by the government. So we did it on private property in a 1,000 to 2,000 square metre shed. So even if COVID came, we would have safe distancing and so forth. So Chew the Fat really just came out of a blank sheet of paper with no rules, meaning like we discriminated against females and no chicks allowed, or men only. We don't talk about females. Men only. We put on free beer, which I've always been against. I've always not liked having beer. So none of my talks, done 200 talks from between 2015 to 20, never have beer there. And then I just thought, shit, I actually reckon you take all the rules out to get blokes to come. What are you going to do? And it's impossible to get drunk because we hold the alcohol back. You'll only get 1 or 2 beers. And it's just a really informal night. But those informal nights, they don't look like mental health nights. They're just blokes sharing a story. Now, we take a punt. Sometimes we get real fresh speakers who have never done a talk before, right? That's a risk, We've had 5 nights. We've had some incredible speakers. We've had some incredible stories with newbies doing their first talk for the first time. But the more vulnerable people get, the more likely the guy in the audience actually is going to. We had our last one at Owen. Now, I don't think it was our strongest speaking night, but it was the reverse. We had about 10 blokes line up to speak to the lad who his story was powerful, but he was I think he was probably a bit nervous doing it, but he got heaps of questions. Now, if you've got a really powerful speaker there who is like above the clouds, such a good speaker, less people ask questions.
The question, Anthony, is firstly, where can I find some resources in terms of how best to support people who may like how to look for signs and how best to support people who might be in a similar place. And also, you mentioned around the GP, and you said you'd known her for years. She was a rather attractive doctor, and if it was a GP whom you may not have known as well, or may have been, you know, like an older bloke or a different kind of GP, what would you have said that was different, and how different do you think the outcome would have been?
I'll ask the first question. So as far as resource, where do you go to get resources to support people? I've sat in the fence the whole 7 years, and I've been proven right that I don't like giving out advice for the clinical things to get yourself back on track. I always divert back to my neutral position, and once again, it's the biggest loss-making product of my life. Life back tracker. All I ever go back to for people, regardless of what their trigger is, because whatever their issue is, it's just a trigger, isn't it, Nick? Whatever their issue is, it's a trigger, right? Now, categorically, if you exhaust yourself for a month by doing 20 lots of exercises, get help to park the alcohol and the drugs. You talk, meaning you confide in a mate and you see a doctor, and then you work on your sleep. I just get back to, they are such basic human things that will get you, I guarantee you, they'll get you in a better spot to confront life stuff, right? That's as far as I go. I've probably had 50 downers since I made that suicide attempt. When I say 50 downers, 50 times where I've fallen into an anxious, a trigger's got me going, right? Now, I've worked in the business with my father and my brother for 17 years. Now, we're three males who just clashed. We clashed heads. We're really successful, like greatest business. They don't suffer from depression, and I do. Now, as soon as there was conflict or something that I knew was going to be decided, I'd disappear. I'd be gone. And I'd go for 2 hours down to the aquatic centre and I would swim. It's like, buddy, a person being chased by a shark. I would swim so fast, so long. And then when I get out after 2 hours, I'm just so much calmer. So I really avoid trying to answer questions about how I support people if they're getting better. Now, your last question was
the GP. If it was a different GP.
Now, Nick, if it was a different GP, I should have pressed the stop button in the first 30 seconds. And I wish I could have had that time again, because I only went to the GP once before I made my attempt, right? And early intervention is my absolute passion, because if I'd gone to a GP 3 months earlier, I wouldn't have been on the critical stage 4 level. I should have gone in there. She's a Jackie Cole, good-looking doctor. She'd known me for 30 years. What was I going to do? Go in there and fall into a million pieces and get upset? So if I had my time again, I would have cut I would have left the GP clinic, gone back out, made another appointment with a bloke, and I would have mustered the guts to go in there and tell the bloke everything, because I absolutely would have got sorted. There wasn't such a shortage back in 2003 of clinical psychologists, and you could get into psychiatrists a lot quicker. So I would have got rolled short. I would have got help.
Just conscious that it seems that guilt and shame are big parts of our reluctance to talk about what's going on, or to seek help, or to admit what's going on. And I presume that after making an attempt, that there can be also a lot of guilt and shame about having made that attempt. I'm just wondering what insights you'd learnt about afterwards, how I perhaps dealt with the guilt and shame of having made that attempt, and what insights you have on that might help me and others as we talk to people trying to come to terms either with thinking of making an attempt or having made an attempt, how they deal with the guilt and shame that perhaps is there.
Yeah, okay, good question. I never had any guilt or shame because I don't remember. I genuinely, honestly, don't remember wanting to take my own life. It just seems ridiculous. How can you press number 21, go to the top of a building, walk to the edge of a balcony, climb over and jump without consciously intending to do it? So I didn't actually. I can't believe I did that. No, I can't remember any of it. So when I woke up, there was no guilt. There was no shame. There was embarrassment. I was terribly embarrassed. So one thing I probably did share, would probably like to share, is I even for a good 6 months, I felt so embarrassed to go out socially, because I'd see someone who I wasn't socially really connected with, but they know me, and what do you do? What do you do? Like I tried to take. They think I tried to take my own life. Now I think 8 out of 10 people do consciously have a rational thought that they want to end their life. I didn't. So for about 6 months, that was my real struggle socially. I would only go out with group packs of friends, right? And they would, protect me. So if we saw someone who knew me and hadn't met me since the accident, they would kind of introduce the person to the group, and we would just have a chat.
Anthony, how did your friends react to that? Because obviously with that embarrassment, I suppose your behaviour would change slightly. Did you find that your friends embraced you and weren't awkward around you, or did you find that you had to find your own way again with some of your friends?
Yeah, no, the incredible connection I got back with my mates, like three of the 12 in the 12 months post my accident went through severe depression, right? So categorically, 2 of them would never have ever coming out to say they weren't well. Now, it was only because I'd gone through what I went through that they talked about it. So it was actually the reverse. It was my friendships were so much better post my attempt. How silly is that? You know, my biggest worry was I had a spinal. So my major injuries were I had a spinal injury on my left side, so I lost all the use of my left shoulder downwards. And that was like it was a dead piece of arm. It just couldn't do anything. It just flopped around, and that was, I wanted to actually amputate at the shoulder, because I used to go out with this arm, and even if I recovered, I'd be walking around with this very disfigured arm. Now I don't give a shit, you know, and people, you don't worry about that stuff.
I think the important thing there.
Sorry?
I was going to say, I think the important thing there to take away is the fact that if you, by the sounds of it, by opening up or taking that option of kind of everyone knowing, you found your mates got around you. And I think that's a really important message, is that you should never be ashamed to open up to your friends. You should never be ashamed to talk to your friends about what's going on with you, because I think that we sometimes don't respect that friendship enough in terms of how close people would be to support you around that.
Absolutely. And I didn't lose one friend. One friend was distant for about a decade. And it wasn't until I flew down to Millicent to do a talk, and they had a suicide at the school, one of the teachers, and And then I shared my story, and Rob was like, shit, I've been really pissed off all these 10 years because I thought you actually remembered doing it and made a decision. But like, as we know, if we open up to people and talk about this stuff, 1 in 3 will be going through something now. Isn't that right, Simon? No, 1 in 3, they say it's
Yeah.
one in 5. I reckon it's higher than that, especially now since COVID. I mean, who isn't anxious, uncertain, and just you can't plan your world, you know. But coming back to Jeff's question with the guilt and the, yeah, I never felt any of it because I didn't ever intend to do it, right? But I've met with in Adelaide probably about 80 people who have tried to take their life and hadn't taken their life, and that's the number one thing that they really struggle with, because most of those people actually worked out a plan and they tried to carry it out. And I can't answer that question because I just know that would be hard as a person to try and establish that confidence again. But I think almost in reverse, like when people get back into a better place, a mental better place, it proves to the world that, you know, look at me now, I'm actually 100% okay. I can't believe I tried. What is the thought of trying to take your life? Like, it's just madness. And I think if anything, it gives context to this illness. I did a talk to the Campbelltown Council this afternoon, and there was 150 council people there, and there was all the men were right at the back, and they didn't ask any questions. There were about 60 ladies at the front. Well, they asked about 15, 20 questions till well past the closing time.
You got out there and did something in, from 2003, 4, 15, like you've been doing it for a while. And during that time, our stats have just got worse.
Yeah.
And we've been on, it's talk about investment, $115 million, in the last 10 years we've put in directly into reducing the suicide in New South Wales. And at the moment, the ROI on that is, terrific. They've had an increase every year, right? So if you're, a businessman, you'd be happy. I'm not happy because we haven't found the magic button yet to push for men. So, and I'd be interested. You talk to a lot of guys, you've got a good platform, and you have a powerful message. What is your thought? What are we missing here, mate? What are we, like I have a few views. I'm sure so many accomplished people on this call have some views, but I'm just wondering, what do you think?
Oh, I've got lots. I could talk for 15, 20 minutes on this. I think the first thing, now OCD was my illness. It's also my massive strength. So with all the currency and car importing, numbers are just past performance predicts future outcomes. Suicide, there's no data and no stats on suicide, right? And South Australia's just passed it through the parliaments over Christmas time, and I've applied to go on the suicide prevention committee for the government, and hopefully I'll get on it. There is going to be a road toll, suicide toll statistic in South Australia. I don't know, I should know about the other states, but within 12 months, there is a delay between the suicide and when it gets reported. We know that, but there will be a map that will show exactly where the suicides are happening. Right now, that is crucial. I think firstly, to actually know where these suicides are happening. I do a lot of work up at Roxby Downs with the main mine is BHP up there, and there is a shitload of suicide up there, right? And people, and then the term up there is that people go home to die, meaning they get off the mine site, they get a little bit of intervention, they get world-class intervention on site, they go back to New South Wales, and then within 6 or 10 days they've passed away. So I think data, the business, it needs 15 or 20 years of data. We've got no data. I think early intervention, is absolute the blood is the key. And I think, language, I reckon there's got to be a really cool piece of marketing that someone will come out to make it a real fun brand, because suicide, we can't keep making it depressing and all this stuff, right?
Oh man, I love that idea. It's the idea of stigma. Even the word stigma is unpleasant. Yeah,
and I think if I didn't get to the national finals for Australian of the Year, but I had to write my whole speech out, and I had a great team in Sydney who got the speech together, and it was words, if a bloke broke his leg today, he'd get help. He'd be honest with his doctor about his broken leg, and it would be looked after, wouldn't it? Right. So we need to get to that the exact same space, so that if someone has got a problem with their mind, that they get the exact same treatment. Now, it's going to take a shitload of leadership. There are countries in the world where suicide is way lower than Australia. There's got to be some bold leadership at government level to change it, because the language is all the same, and nothing, as you said, nothing's changing.
We know that change takes a long time, but thankfully for people such as yourself, Anthony, and many of us on the call tonight, it's something which we know we can all contribute something towards.
I'll just close on one point, and it was really evident at the city of Campbelltown this afternoon. Now, early on when I started, I'd done about 15 or 20 talks, and in big audiences, and people were asking me how to spot the signs and how do you intercept someone who you think's not great. And anyway, I'm not qualified to give you the exact answer, but I've got my own ways. I then grabbed hold of Are You OK, rang them up in Sydney and said, can I be an ambassador for it? Now, education and training is, forget government up the top, right? Bloody tough to change everything, but education on the ground. Now, I was only with them for an hour today at Campbelltown, and there was about 6 or 7 blokes who I kind of got them to teach back to me. How do you ask the question properly? If your gut feeling is that Simon Jarvis, I've met Simon once, right? Simon, if I see you again, Simon, next time, and you're closed, you're very closed, there's no laughing on the phone, you're just off with the pixies, right? Well, we know the way. Simon, I'd get you in a quiet spot. Simon, I've noticed 2 things that aren't quite right. This, number 1, you're not happy with me. Number 2, you closed me down. Is everything all right? I'm concerned. So my point being is whether it's the Are You OK process, which I really like, which is asking the question, listening, encouraging action and checking in. There was about 7 or 8 blokes who asked me after the talk, right, I'm going to try this weekend because I've got 2 mates who I think are really shit. And so we did a bit of a practice skit, right? Now, I know that's one by one, but education and training on the ground can easily be done. Mental health first aid training is absolutely, now why they don't make that mandatory at a certain percentage, because that black and white, that does change the space. If you've done a mental health first aid training course and you learn about these signs, like the husband and wife and my best mate who saw me 4 hours before I walked off the building, he knew that I was in a bad spot, but he didn't know how to bring it up. He didn't know how to have a conversation, and he didn't know what to do.
Thing to take away from this is, no matter where you feel right now or where you feel at that point, there's always an opportunity to get better, and there's always an opportunity to improve how you feel